Welcome back to another Strongfit Podcast episode. I'm back from, if you guys can't tell, I don't know if the lighting can show it, I'm a little bit darker. Came back from Dubai a couple weeks. I show up and coach says I have some cool things to talk about, anxiety, some physiological, but has to do with the brain.
It has to do. Right, so I did a Juliens Corner Podcast, but that one is only going to be for the mentoring program, so you guys might not see it. But we had two coaches where we tested I remember like the lactate at rest, and they were at 6.0, right? And so that's
very high.
That's very high, right? So to give an idea, I'm around, and I'm kind of a high baseline person. I'm at 1.0, which is actually fairly low, which is real. But anyway. But so you can tell like the level of nervousness, shall we call it, can be measured with lactate at rest.
Right.
So I found that interesting. So we look at those two, and they are 6.0. It's a panic state. So from studies, we've seen that there's been many studies on this. If you give a solution of lactate to people that have anxiety crisis, you get panic attacks.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. So there seems to be a level of lactate in the body anyway, and panic attacks. So what was interesting is they were linking the lactate levels of the brain with the panic attacks.
Okay.
Right. At a certain level, and I'm testing it because I can't find the exact number, but at a certain level of lactate in the blood-brain barrier opens, and that lactate get into the brain as fuel.
Okay.
Right. So first of all, what is that number? I don't know, but from what I saw, it seems to be between 4 and 6. So far that I saw, like I can't really guarantee it, but so my idea was, imagine if we were to drive the levels of lactate past a certain level, just out of stressing what the one around us, that would lead the lactate directly into the brain, and brain acidity, which is not the same thing as lactate, but has been linked to anxiety toward panic attacks.
Okay.
So I'm starting to think there's a relationship there that is interesting, where you are like this, you start to stress, we start to get into a fight. That's what's happened with Yaya at the seminar, right? I'm at 1.0, I get a fight, I calm down, and I'm still at 3.5. That means that during the fight, he shut up, right? Almost like a high anxiety, and then shoots down. If you do that on a regular basis and your levels are very high, it's possible that it does physiological things, like, for example, opening the blood-brain barrier that would let the lactate into the brain as fuel, never as waste product, as fuel. But that would trigger almost like a extreme sympathetic reaction if this was not followed by the fight the body expects.
Okay, yeah.
Right, so there would be a physiological component to this. Right. So that means that, again, like you go around, your level lactate as high, it goes into the brain, boom, panic attack.
Yeah.
So there would be a physiological component to that, which kind of would explain why, because I've seen it before, the lactate staying in the blood does not seem to be a good thing. So if you look what they call the anabolic threshold, there is no such thing, but you see that in runners, where you make them do sprints, and then we saw that the fight to flight switch is when the lactate just shoots up to a point where it's just too much. Why is it too much? We're not sure. But they all go because I have level of acidity, except acidity level and the lactate have never been proven to be actually correlated. That's not true. So it seems that the body, at some point, too much lactic acid in very high dosage coincides with panic attacks. That might be maybe necessary for high fights or wherever, but you know what I mean? Right. But there seems to be something there, that high level of lactate and what it corresponds to. It seems to be like high level of lactate equals panic attack. Maybe that panic attack is required for a super high fight. And so that means that if you stress past a certain level, on a daily basis, you would tell your brain in a way that there's a major fight that is always there, except he can't find it, and then things unravel from there, like the somatic error becomes too big or something like that.
Okay.
Right. So what was interesting with that is then we go back to VO2 max, which is a capacity to oxidize things, in that case, the lactate.
Yeah.
So then I saw two things. I saw that those two coaches at very high level of lactate were doing interval training only.
Okay.
So teach them themselves to go, hey, and then pushing the lactate, pushing the lactate, but never learning a steady fight. So is it possible that doing only interval training teaches you to spike continuously, never teaching you to stay under control during a fight? So that means that you would learn to, to go, hey, and then a little problem arrives in your day and you react like that. Your lactate shows up too high, no fight, panic attack.
Right.
So then that would mean that there would be a relationship of the lactate at rest, your VO2 max, and your levels of anxiety. So that's not to say that low levels of lactate means no anxiety, because anxiety will also, as we say, it just depends on how you look at the world. If you have a fight with your daughter, your anxiety, your lactate goes up. So it would be as much how you look at the world. Is that a problem or not? Your capacity to go, hey, chill, but versus also your type of training. So that means that you would have to see what your levels of lactate are at rest, so the way you look at the world, versus your VO2 max, your capacity to have a steady fight within the stress. So a physiological baseline versus reaction to stress thing.
Right. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Right. So that means that if I only make you train in interval training, which is what I do.
Yeah.
If you look between the strongman and the jiu-jitsu and everything, that means that my reaction to stress is always
it blows up.
But then all I'm doing is, and never doing steady cardio, is only teaching my levels of lactate to shoot up.
Right.
What I'm not learning is
how to maintain
steady
that
fight. Yeah. So lactate, but not too much. And it seems that there's a sweet spot. Is the sweet spot the part where the blood barrier opens? I don't know. But that kind of leads to interesting ideas.
Yeah. So the goal then is to figure out the phase 2 type training where it's
right, exactly,
and maintaining that baseline where it's not anaerobic threshold, it's not an anaerobic threshold, but
so yeah,
kind of staying in that steady cardio,
but pushing it enough.
Right.
So again, this in December would be cool to have that base just to to clear your head.
Right.
But it wouldn't be the same thing as like just that pure steady cardio that teaches you a steady fight and not to continuously go pop
and push. Yeah.
So
that's kind of what the Marines do. So like the Marines, when they do their rucks, I mean, it's 2 minutes on, 1 minute off, but I mean, it's not a hard push. It's like a jog-ish to a fast walk, right? Yeah. And so they keep that threshold. So then, so how would you gauge that threshold?
Right. So if you look, all the talk is always that level of lactate, VO2 max, VLA max, and all that stuff. What is not in the conversation is, but maybe all this has nothing to do with the level of VO2 max. Right? Maybe all you're doing is teaching the system how to approach stress.
Okay.
And the VO2 max and then the lactate and everything is just a measure, not a target, but a measure of how you deal that reaction to stress.
Right.
So then maybe that's why CrossFit works so well. I remember early Glassman.
Yeah.
Like we disagree on the pyramid, metabolic conditioning first. I'm like, no, strength first, but structure first. Anyway, but his thing was do all energy systems, practice sports.
Right.
But if you look, it's that, right? So you practice all energy system, which means you do the interval training because you need to learn to spike. To produce, to deal aggressively with the situation. Yeah. But then you need also to learn a steady fight.
Right.
You need to learn strength because you need the structure. And then you need to put it into action in a sport because nothing replaces a sport.
Right.
And I'm not saying CrossFit.
Yeah.
That's not a sport. That's still exercising for
another word.
But that moving, like for example, I don't know, I'll use the one I'm doing, but doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Kickboxing, because I've never done rotation.
Right.
Like kicking, because you kick at full speed while they skill and
Right.
I've never managed to find an exercise like that in the gym.
Right.
Right. But so if you look at that idea of CrossFit, then not like we all go at the physiological level, which is still what drives me nuts in that world. But maybe all we're doing really is teaching the reaction to stress. And that means we need to learn all reactions to stress.
Right. Yeah.
And performance is a guidance, not VO2 max, not that. Those are just measures
They're
toward
measurements,
performance. But so if you see at the Marines, is they go like, why do I need in a fight? So I would say, like they say, you can, because you're going to go on for hours as long as you need. So you need that steady fight. I would
agree,
argue with them that you need the spike as well, because sometimes the guy is coming at you.
Yeah.
But then, and what they don't build is the structure or stuff like that. But it would come to sense like they train like that because that's the best way to train the mental fight. Because what happens if you only do interval training? Then you learn to spike. Eventually, you're going to get yourself to a panic attack,
right?
Which you cannot have.
Yeah,
fighting.
But
look what happens to CrossFit at that 2-year mark. When they want to compete, competition, all the workouts are short, so you start to do more interval training.
Yeah.
And you drive yourself to a super high anxiety. And then what you do, you want steady. Because steady is the only thing that allows you to deal with your reaction to stress.
Right.
So I feel there's a physiological sweet spot we can measure, but in order to train the system toward reaction to stress. Your levels of lactate, we're doing a study on this right now, where we measure the lactate at rest, lactate during training, and VO2 max and level of anxiety of the person. Level of anxiety, those tests are not good, so I don't think I can use it. But I'm going to see levels of lactate at rest versus VO2 max.
Okay.
And see if the VO2 max is indication of the fight versus level of lactate at rest. So we might be able to measure that sweet spot. As long as we understand that what we are training is a reaction to stress.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's a complication. What was super interesting on that study was that everybody, right before they got on a treadmill, was having lactate at rest between 4 and 6.
Right.
Almost a panic attack. Why? Because they were getting on they were about to go on the treadmill. How funny is that? They get on the treadmill, they all go down to 1 because they were either CrossFitters or long distance runner. They all come down to 1 or 2.
Once they start moving.
Right.
Yeah.
And then it took them 5 minutes to go back to 6. So right before the test, at rest, at the same level of lactate in the blood than 5-6 minutes in with the stuff that goes faster and higher.
Right.
How funny is that?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because they knew they were going to be tested. So is it the testing? Is it the, I know I'm going to exercise?
Right.
But
it's a being tested because I stress the fuck out.
Whenever you...
Yeah, and I'm always like, oh, and I try to get out of it. And then once I'm in, I'm like, hey, I'm actually doing pretty good. And then I can push.
Exactly, once you're in it.
Yeah.
So that's the one that interests me.
Yeah.
That one. How do I deal with that moment? You know, right before the test where you go like, wait. Because it's...
Right.
Because if your levels of lactate at that moment are too high, it's possible, that's why I'm looking at, that there's a physiological reason that you need to quit. Because let's say you go to the 6 and it opens the brain barrier and now it's an attack onto your brain.
Right.
So you need to exercise right now or quit.
Yeah.
And that would explain those almost panic attacks feeling that we get.
Yeah.
So then you will need to do more cardio. Some ideas, you would need to do more cardio, more steady fight to stop spiking so much.
Spikes, yeah.
But based on the sport that you do, spiking, like if you're a sprinter, I need you to spike. But if you spike too much before, then you quit.
Yeah.
Right. So is that what happened? So is there a way, is there a training session, which is always what interests me, is there a training session that you will need to do so that you don't panic right before you're about to be tested?
Well, and that's been kind of the warm-ups and cool-downs are kind of what we're always kind of working on, not so much, the training session, when I say warm-up, it's not like a dynamic warm-up of stretching and bands, but it's how do you get mentally and physically prepared for whatever that is that you're going to be testing, right?
Right.
And so that's a fun one. I'm sure that there's a way, right? So, but I think it depends on the skill you're trying to test.
Right, but is it, okay, but there's also, so your view on it, right? So for example, if it's being tested, maybe it has nothing to do with the physical test. Maybe it's the idea of being tested, because then it's a cognition thing.
Right.
It has nothing to do with the physical test. It's just the fact that someone is testing you, and then I know me, I'm like, that's telling me what to do.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no.
Right.
But then, but my no might be higher than it should be if I were more steady in my response to stress instead of spiking.
Right. Well, and I think it depends on the cognition side of things, like what you're being tested on will depend on the level of lactate. So is that the observation, the body creating the observation going like,
exactly. Right. So, but that's the thing, right? So do you stress out because of what you're being tested on, or did you also train your reactions to stress to the moment where the second you're tested, you just panic?
Right.
And so then you make a rational conversation with yourself saying, that's because I don't like being tested on that. But is that conversation bullshit? Is that because no, your levels of lactate are already too high, and that it's a danger to your brain, and so you're quitting because you need to.
Right.
And then you're kind of rationalizing that in your own head because you need a reason.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And is that because? So, because I look at my history of quitting the second I was going to get good at stuff, but that's also my history of never doing steady cardio.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which doing jiu-jitsu and all that stuff is crazy, but yeah, I always fucking hated it. I know one thing is I'm doing it now because of kickboxing, and I'm better at reacting to certain things, but now I'm starting to wonder if there's a test there.
Right.
You know, VO2 max versus, which I'm sure mine is very low.
Yeah.
Still. So VO2 max versus lactate at rest, and then we established that, is that the reaction to stress? Is there a number there? Is there a sweet spot? Is there a way for us to get there? Because if you look when you warm up people, maybe that's what you get too. Because at first the lactate is high, but then you lower the lactate, but then you prepare them on their expectation and everything. Is that, what is it we're doing?
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I think the sweet spot really depends on the person, right? So it goes back to
exactly.
So then it's how do you see the physiological signals as a coach, or for you training? What is it that you're seeing that would signal the lactate level so you're not pricking? Because I don't want to prick my fingers.
That's another problem.
Yeah.
But because no matter what, maybe if there is that sweet spot of lactate versus VO2 max, what people are going to make a mistake is they measure, but not understanding that it depends on the person sees.
Right. It's on the reaction of stress.
Yes, exactly. That's still that. So maybe you don't like being tested for your own reason. Maybe you don't like being tested on that exercise.
Right.
Maybe you don't like being tested because you want to suck in front of people. There's still what they're going to call psychological reason, but that's not. I don't like when they say that because it's not psychological in that sense. It's still prediction versus observation. Yeah. It's still that game. But then that would mean that, and which is something we've said forever, is that the physiological is just a testing measure of what the system does. You can't split them in that sense. But at the same time, on that one, I feel like there's a sweet spot to gauge on that one that relates directly to anxiety. Like you know, like they rely on steady cardio. A lot of your anxious people rely heavily on steady cardio.
It's always type 2. Is it called type 2 training or something where they stay they stay there, right? And you see the anxiety levels.
Is that because they can't take spikes? Because they're already spiking mentally. You see what I mean? That's what I'm
There's
starting
a lot
to
of them that have a hard time reaching intensity.
Reach intensity physically, but is it because they reach intensity mentally? They spike themselves continuously. So they taught themselves to spike. Their reaction to stress mentally through the roof. So physically they can't. Remember, like we had athletes like that in CrossFit. It was either like there was the pacers, but they were stressed out all week long, constantly. Exactly. But then they had to pace. Or we had the other one that were always chill, but then spike themselves into training. Like crazy. Like the pacer have very good VO2 max.
Right.
Whereas the internal had very good VLA max. So I'm starting if there's so like a VLA VO2 max, but versus the mental approach to things. From an observation perspective, so you could spike physically, but you could spike mentally.
Right.
And where is the relationship? How did you teach yourself? So a reaction to stress mentally, a reaction to stress physically. So one mentally, one physically. And how you taught yourself which one is necessary. And then so we work on the other.
Right.
So that's sweet spot. Then we could never bring them to intensity until we get them to do something mentally steady cardio. So you know what I mean?
Right.
So like work both sides of an
it's
arch.
Creating safety in the environment at the end of it, right? Because when we were doing the lactate test at that seminar, the run she had no issue maintaining the lactate levels, and before she grabbed the sandbag, the lactate levels went through the roof. Remember? So it was. I think there's so much of that cognition, that observation going, no.
Right.
So
it's like that whole arch mental physical, I mean. So you have someone who spikes mentally but can't find intensity physically. Then maybe to find them intensity physically, we first need to gain a steady fight mentally. Right.
So we need to create a safe environment, or a safe enough environment where they can
train them
acting.
there maybe. So maybe they introduce the idea of training there like steady.
First.
Before we can spike them physically. So for me, for example, the first thing I need to do is go do steady cardio. Because then I'm steady mentally during the steady cardio and teach myself not to fucking spike.
Right. So that brings me back to a conversation we were having 3-4 months ago, where we started, I think it was longer than that, but we were looking at anxiety and sadness as a driver of sorts.
Right.
And we were talking about the anxiety driver people need to slow down on the movements, and which would mean less
not
of a
spiking.
exactly. And then on the sadness driver, we needed them to go harder.
Yeah.
Which kind of makes sense.
Right, so there's an arch there. So maybe we can finally figure out sadness, because that's been around for a while. Like anxiety, I think we got. The sadness as a driver is the harder one. There's an arch there. We talked about the mental physical arch for fucking 6 years, but now I'm starting to think that's where it is. It's spike versus steady.
Versus steady, yeah.
So you like that one. I'm on the run, right? And I'm doing really good. Like I have a run, I go to the Western Park and back, right? I do it usually 20 minutes. That day was like somewhere last week. I did it under around 17, so I fucking killed it. Like I'm going good, like, everything is going the right way and everything. And I noticed something. I'm focusing on my feet and the breathing, exhale into inhale.
Yeah.
And when I do that, I'm in the present. And then I'm not freaking out, so I'm not spiking. I'm staying steady, but at a high pace.
Right.
Which I'm like, ooh, I like that. I found it very hard to do mentally, by the way. Stay steady like that, but at a high, I wanted to spike all the time.
Okay.
But at some point, I'm finding myself with the breathing into a groove, into a rhythm. Feet, so focusing on my feet, proper grip, focusing on my breathing, exhale to inhale, and I'm really getting a groove going. And so at some point, of course, I'm thinking world champion. Jiu-jitsu, always. Because obviously, I'm running, second time I'm running. Yeah. So what's fascinating is then I start freaking out.
Yeah.
Right, but then I realized something. You know why I was freaking out? Because my thought went from the present to the future. Right, and so, but then I realized something. The future, the future took me to panic mode. I lost the breathing, the looking inside and everything. So I was like, that future took me towards sympathetic.
Right.
So it was future equal ego equals high sympathetic.
Yeah.
Take you away from the present. And so the first thing I did was focus back on my breathing and my feet. Then I went back and then I could go fast again. Right. But there was an whole idea of that, of being in the future ego equal high sympathetic, that I thought was very interesting, because if you look at sadness and everything, it's always what happened. It's
always what happened, yeah.
Anxiety is always about what's coming, right? So that future, so intrusive thought patterns, being a sympathetic reaction we talked about in Disney December, and that one was based on the future. So the second ego came in,
then it's
competition, it took me to the future,
right?
Sympathetic lost it. And I had to come back to the present. No. There's no jiu-jitsu competition, there's nothing. You're here, just fucking do your run.
Right.
Don't go anywhere else. So is that escapism? Because I've done this my whole life. Remember Star Wars, when Yoda says always looking in the future, because the guy is a farm boy, that's escapism.
Yeah.
Is that what I've been doing?
Well, that's what you see.
All that stuff. When did I lose it? Wanting to turn pro, that's escapism.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Well, that's something I always have a conversation. She usually doesn't watch the podcast, so it's okay. Yeah. But it's, let's open up a restaurant. I was like, let's just invite people over to my house, charge them 40 euros, and I'll make food for everybody, all you can eat and drink, or bring your own wine. Yeah. And then from there, then we can find a small place. And then before I know it, she's already talking about having these franchise of, 100 seat restaurants with this. And I'm like, you're looking at like 20 million, and then out of nowhere, it's a way to escape, to not take action, right? So that's kind of what happened on the run, is you're just escaping to not take action of the run that you're doing right now.
Right, but I think the escapism, the reason why is because I was doing good.
Yeah, so you're wanting to sabotage to go to the flight.
Totally.
Yeah.
And then what did I do? Future.
Yeah.
World Championship, ego.
Yeah.
But if you look, I've done that with Jiu-Jitsu before. I've done it with strongman and everything. I'm about to turn pro. I'm about to be good. Escapism, I start to project in the future. That's totally sympathetic, ego-based. And then I crash.
Yeah.
I was on the run. It was so glaringly obvious. I talked to Julien after about that, and she was like, oh, that's what I do.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. Is that, I'm going to race for Europeans. I'm going to race for nationals. Like, that's in June. Why don't you just run fast?
Yeah.
And no, but she was super happy, because when I came back from the run, I was like, sit down, let me explain what just happened to me. And she was like, that's what I do.
Right.
It's that escapism of it's a sabotage form of not being able to take the pressure of doing well right now. Because then you have to realize I do well right now, but I have to do it tomorrow.
Right.
And the day after.
Yeah.
And the day after. And the day after, which we all know. But that moment, it was real.
Right.
You know, it's at 10,000 reps. Like I love, Paul tells me all the time when I kick, he's like, yeah, 10,000 times, man. Like, right.
Yeah.
I want one time and I'm done.
Yeah. Nope.
No. That's not
Doesn't work that way. Yeah.
But I think my biggest failure has been that. Is that I want one time and I'm done.
Yeah.
Then it's over. It's never over. It's 10,000 times. It's not one.
Right.
It's 10,000 reps. So it's that training where you're present every day. It's constraints based. It's another conversation I was having with her, but it's like constraint based means insecurity in the sense of not knowing what's next by definition.
Right.
You said constraint and it takes you wherever it takes you.
Yeah. It's the knowing that you're always going to be the student.
Right. Whereas an objective allows you to have a security in the sense I know where I'm going. You don't.
Right.
It's a complete lie. But that's the idea. So World Championship, I know where I'm going, I have an objective. Ego, sympathetic, freaked out.
Right.
And I was like, that's where the power is staying within the constraint, which I should know because I say it all the time, but doesn't matter. But it was staying within the run. So I had to go back to looking in, no intrusive thought patterns, staying in the present, which you've said a million times.
Yeah.
But until you experience it, like it hit me
You're like, what happened?
that day. Yeah. But what also hit me was how my breathing and my heart rate went straight up. I went back to spiking.
Right.
Because I escaped the present. It was very interesting there.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's kind of, I see that in anxiety in people, the same concept.
Yeah, I mean, there's never any presence, right? So it's the ability for people to displace the tension mentally and physically is insane.
It's infinite.
I mean, that's that's what I do with my assessments. You know, we had where I had an assessment. I'm doing leg races. I was like, hey, be here. And then they're like, what? And then they be there. And then they start talking, no, focus. Look at your leg. Make your leg work. I'm feeling my back. I was like, that's because you're not focusing. Focus.
Because you're fully
And I think like 5 minutes, it's just like, I don't get what you mean by displacing the tension. I don't get what you mean about being present. I was like, you weren't present for this whole thing.
Yeah.
I was like, do you remember lifting your leg? She goes,
what do you mean? What? Oh, sorry, what?
Yeah. Oh, exactly. Oh, okay. You know, and it takes that, you know, I always say find pleasure in the pain. Like, be there. And I think that's what they're doing now. That makes more sense. The lactate is just spiking mentally.
Right.
And then
they're gone. Yeah.
Yeah.
So to me, by the way, I enjoyed the run. Like, and then I killed the time and I'd be seeing, but twice I had to go like, what are you doing?
Right.
Like ego took over and I'm like, no, come back.
Yeah.
Like, don't get me wrong. I hate running, but I did enjoy it because it was like, I was a high pace, but fighting it.
Right.
But you know what it was? It was when you're present is you have to fight every second. Yeah. There was no, not focusing on the foot, on my breathing, like every breath, every step. Yeah.
Just go, yeah.
Yeah. But I think that's been my greatest failure is avoiding that.
Yeah.
So then I'm looking at that and then that's what I see within anxiety. Is that, no, that rep. That's constraint based. But then it's terrorizing you because you don't know where you're going.
Well, I stopped doing my stupid fucking cold set because I got so obsessed with the stupid fucking 100 reps at 100 kilos. And I'd start bench pressing and I could bench press it. But I'm like, now I'm just trying to get, like, it's no longer, it's no longer that fun exploration piece that I was having at the beginning because I put it, social media destroyed me. Because I was posting on social media and I was like, well, shit, they're expecting me to get to 100 reps. And I'm like, fuck, I need to get to that 100 reps.
Right.
And so every day I was like, I should get to the 100 reps because it's been a month that I've been there.
Yep.
Yeah, and so I was already gone. That makes so much more sense.
I did not time the run. I knew it was all around 17 because I came back and then I had sent a message that gave me the time. I was like, oh, fuck, I went fast.
Yeah.
Thank God, because otherwise I'd be screwed. But this is where it is.
But the time doesn't even matter. It was a good run.
It was a good run.
Yeah.
I had, you know what matters is I had a really high pace. And outside of those two things, I did not let it go.
Yeah.
And you know, I fucking hate running. So it sucked. But suddenly it was like, that was a good fight.
Right.
And that particular fight, that feeling right there is where I give up.
Right.
It's that fear of success as much of anything, because that's where success is for me. If I get that pace, like that 20 minutes, I'll be better at jiu-jitsu. When I did jiu-jitsu on Thursday, my win was great.
Yeah.
I was broken up. Like, I was so sore. Like in weird places, I was like, right. Speaking of that, the sandbag is the best thing you can do for jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
Anyway, there's no question. But that feeling of success right there, that's the one I could not take.
Right.
I can take it now, you know why? Because of Janina, because I feel I can build a life where I'll be happy. I so can put myself back 20, 30s into that feeling of success and just blowing a casket.
Right.
Self-sabotage, because that feeling of success, when you're like, yeah, that's what I need to do. Like once I felt what I need to do to succeed, I would just destroy it.
Yeah.
Now I'm like, no, I won't quit. This is where success is and I'm gonna stick with it.
Right.
Oh, that was a very important, that one was very important for me to see that.
So I wonder if there's a way that we can test, maybe it's not anxiety levels, but the cognitive present level and lactate.
Versus VO2 max.
Versus VO2 max, yeah. That would be interesting to test.
Right, so imagine that. That's a very good point. Actually, that would be the thing then, cognitive presence. Mm-hmm. That's where we're going to try to test.
So that could be like the reactions, right? Like, which I wanted to buy because they look like, I've been watching the Formula One, the new season, amazing. But they have like the little sticky things and they light up and you have to touch them, right?
Lomachenko does that, the boxer.
Yeah, so you have to kind of be present, but maybe like even doing riddles. So like that's where I was doing the reps of, you say 4, you do 4, you say 5, you do 4, you do say 6, you do 3.
That's the fun, yeah.
Doing things like that where you need to stay present mentally and physically and still be completing a task.
It'd be very interesting to see, like, for example, a person with a high VO2 max, we test the lactate doing the song.
Yeah.
Because those endurance runners, they can't fucking do a song. They cannot hear the word. It's amazing.
Right.
I'd be curious to see where they are in there. I mean, but you force them to actually, what we could do? We let them do a song where they just, as usual, don't pay attention, test the lactate, and then one where we go like, we make them listen. Like, you missed one. If you do it again, I restart the song. You know what I mean? And then that kind of stuff. It'd be very interesting to see if we can find that sweet spot as cognitive, measuring cognitive presence.
Yeah.
Not based on words, but like if there's a physiological, imagine if we could find a physiological test in the sense of a number that indicates cognitive presence based on that, the lactate versus VO2 max, because based on the sympathetic test, you could even put osteocalcin in there. I'm curious.
That would be a cool one.
Cognitive presence based on lactate, VO2 max, and osteocalcin. Yeah. We can measure all three. Ooh.
That would be fun.
And that's anxiety.
Yeah.
Because it's a driver, not a disease.
Right.
Right. So let's have a goal. By the way, that's...
You're already looking at the future, Cole.
Yeah,
Stay present.
No, but I want us to have a goal, you and me, for this year, is to establish, through all our courses and everything, a base presence toward anxiety. Because you've said it for a year, they're all going to go into anxiety courses.
Yeah.
And as usual, a lot of our stuff is going to come out.
Yeah.
I want us to have a base presence so that it's seen that we establish like all that stuff out there, and that there is a science-based base there.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because what kills me with the anxiety course that I see is, it sounds to me like more like psychological courses than like physical. Like they say, well, go for a run. I'm like, that doesn't mean shit.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, go for a run. What do you mean? What type of run? There's 6 different ways to do the same run.
They're still just letting you tick the boxes, which means it's not going to fucking work.
It's macros. Yeah. Nothing has changed. So I want us to establish, because I think for fitness coaches going forward, because it's a lot of conversation I have on the coaches course, is coaches want to tackle anxiety because that's the number one problem out there.
Yeah,
but
for sure.
Like, can we do it not the I'm not calling yoga bullshit, don't get me wrong, but that like Facebook type dealing with anxiety, like it's a disease, or whoever you were showing me, like that lady.
Yeah, it's just all passive. It's such bullshit. It's just it's passive approaches to make things simplistic so that people will buy in.
Yes.
That's basically what it is. It's a simplistic way to get people to buy in. That is, at the end, it doesn't work. It just makes shits worse. Like it just, it sucks.
Because he's just digging you deeper into that hole. But I'm just tired of that. It's a new trend now. They're all going to go on anxiety, make most people worse, and just to sell something. That one drives me crazy.
Yeah.
So I want us to establish a strong base so coaches know what anxiety is as a driver, not as a disease or whatever the fuck they call it now and everything. Because like, if I see those people going toward the trend of doing I'll start calling people out because that one upsets me.
Yeah.
It's one thing to use the 70s, stress science to do deadlift. Fine, I disagree with that. Okay, at least you're teaching technique and everything. If they start to go toward anxiety, I'm going to be a lot more pissed. So I want us to establish like a really strong base, and maybe we do an ebook or something like that. But at least so that the base is there. Like understand what anxiety is. You cannot fix it until you understand what it is.
Right.
I think. Yeah. And that's what upsets me with those courses is none of them explain what anxiety is. They go like, oh, do this, do that. I'm like, those are just tricks to go through the day.
Right.
That will not last past the 6 weeks.
Yeah.
That's just selling. I think we need to first establish what anxiety is. And I want us to like really work at that this year because I think that's what is needed the most.
Yeah. For sure.
So there's the testing. There's something there. Like the blood-brain barrier, I don't know yet. Like it's actually very hard to find all this, but we might have to do the testing ourselves, which let's do studies, let's have at it. It'll be fun because then you'll shut up a lot of people. But there's something there. There's a sweet spot there that we're going to find this year. Yeah. It'll be fun.
I'm excited.
And we can, because more and more it's I don't know how many clients you get for anxiety.
Quite a few.
Like even on the coach's course. Yeah. It's because I asked for two things. One of the two is dealing with anxiety with clients. Yeah. I think maybe it's just all coaches that see us, but I think it's most of the coaches that we see know that anxiety is something that we need to understand now.
Yeah, and I think once you open the doors and there's solutions, right? So I think the only solution given was pills. And it's like, well, that doesn't do shit. That just treats symptoms.
60 years later, still stuck in the exact same place. It's just getting worse. So, yeah.
So I think that's the thing is we're giving actual solutions, and it's solutions that need to be done through action and being active, right? Passive. And so I think that's the biggest thing is once the doors are open and you describe it that it's not a disease and it's it's not a symptom, it's a driver that there's actions that need to take place and behavior that needs to change. And that's it. Cycles in the behavior need to change so that you can deal better with stressful things that come in. But stress always comes into your system. So maybe just
controlling a driver.
Yeah.
The driver is never bad. You just have to control it. If you have F1, you better learn to drive.
Right.
Maybe it's just that. Learn
I was
to drive.
watching him. I was looking at the eyes. Oh, it's so cool. You can see different things.
The left versus right. Ooh.
Yeah.
I never pay attention to that. Ooh,
so start paying attention. You'll start to see anyhow. But it's cool. It was really nice.
I never thought of it. Yeah.
See, I watch these shows, guys, but I pay attention to small details.
That's interesting. I look it up. But maybe it's that you're just learning to drive. Same thing with sadness. You just have to control your drivers.
Right. Those would be cool guys to test. Those drivers, fuck. But yeah, just control the. If you can control the drivers and, regulate your, I call them cycles, right? Yeah. Going through that phylogenetic hierarchy. Once you start to regulate and buffer, and you're able to move things around a little bit with the tools that you have to create the stimulus.
Right, and that's the key is you. Yeah. You control your drivers.
Right. Yeah.
You just need the tools, don't get me wrong.
Right. And that's what I do. I mean, but that's what you do with your clients, right? I mean, that's what I do with my clients is I give them the tools and they experiment and they fuck up. And I'm like, well, at least now the severity of that mistake, you're not at a panic attack anymore. Now you're just freaking out a little bit, right? Yeah. But the heart rate's not spiking. You don't feel like you're totally out of control, that you can't breathe.
Let's go from panic to anxiety.
Yeah, we're doing good. And so it's once they start doing that, then it starts to kind of regulate itself.
And to me, that's the biggest conversation is that it's a driver. It's understanding what it is first.
Right.
Because it's a driver. It's not a disease. It's not bad. It's a driver. Just learn to control your own drivers.
Yeah.
That's it. And it seems there's a physiological component to that we're going to start playing. But I think the better we get at understanding that sweet spot, and to us, it'll always be through training because you have to be active, and that's why we know. Yeah. Like the more we'll understand what anxiety truly is, and then therefore the better tools we can offer to people.
For sure.
So that's going to be a huge focus this year because I feel if we understand anxiety, then we understand sadness, we understand behavior.
Yeah.
So it's not about anxiety in that sense. For me, it's always going to be about behavior, but you need an entry.
For sure.
Into behavior, and I think that sympathetic versus parasympathetic, so the anxiety versus sadness, is the entry gate to truly understanding behavior. Because then there's going to be the physiological, and so therefore the prediction versus observation model, which is how everything works, and understanding that sweet spot. And if we can just understand that that, how to control the drivers. I think we control behavior.
Yeah.
And I think this is where the key is, the success lies. I mean,
That'll be huge.
Yeah,
Awesome.
that's going to be our focus. I think it's going to be fun. But there's something there that is powerful,
big one.
I believe. Yep.
Cool.
Anyway.
Awesome, guys. So stay posted. Follow us on Mighty Networks.
Yep.
Get on there. Follow us on Instagram, YouTube, all that good stuff. We'll be on Mighty Networks.
Yeah. And then, we'll see
A
you
lot
there.
more will be on Mighty Networks.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
See you guys
there.
on the next episode.